Hello, I'm Natalie Graham and this is the Sunday Politics in the South East. Coming up later, Ed Miliband launches an attack on the Wonga economy. So what does that mean for places like the Medway towns, which have the greatest concentration of payday lenders in the whole country? Well, joining me in the studio today to discuss that and other topics is Paul Carter, the Conservative leader of Kent County Council, and Janice Atkinson, a UKIP candidate for next year's European elections in the South East. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming. Now, don't drink and, well, we can all complete that important piece of safety advice, but it's been reported that councillors in West Sussex have been advised by the council not to drink and tweet, just in case they say something on social media networks they later regret. So is that sound advice or a little too much management of our local politicians' engagement with the public? Janice, I'll start with you because I know that you are on Twitter. Have you ever typed something in and thought, actually, I'm not going to send that because once it's out there, you can't take it back?
Not on Twitter, no, because I always have a rule. Never drink and never tweet. Never send an email, don't do Facebook or any of those things. So no, don't do it. But it's a great medium for getting across our points, my points on politics, engaging with journalists, etc. But you've got to be very careful with it.
I was going to say, because journalists and your political opponents will be watching everything anyone from your party says and waiting for you to trip up. No,
you have to be very, very careful. But the good thing is, you've only got 140 characters. But never drink and do it, ever, ever.
Paul, do we need to advise our councillors to... shouldn't they know that already?
I think so. I don't think we should regulate at all. It's a free world. I don't tweet or Twitter, and I survive without it. Others do a lot of tweeting and twittering, and nobody yet on the Conservative benches at County Hall has got themselves into trouble, and the Freedom of Information Act does a pretty good job on opening up our email accounts to the world to see on any issue, on any subject at any one time. So I think we're pretty open and transparent, and regulation encourages that, and quite rightly so.
Great, thank you very much for now. We'll move on. It's 6 months since the local election results, which changed the political landscape across the South East. For the first time, UKIP, which had been a minor force until then, took a huge 37 council seats across the region. It made them the official opposition in both Kent and West Sussex. So, what has their record in local government been since those results, and can they really use it, as they'd like to, as a springboard towards even greater success at the general election? We sent Bhavani Vaddy to Thanet in Kent, where UKIP got their best results in the country.
Purple rain, purple rain.
It was a sea of blue that saw waves of purple crashing in on the South East political scene. UKIP's momentous May local election results meant they became the main opposition party in Kent and West Sussex. Critics claimed their success was down to a campaign focused on national issues like Europe and immigration. The party grabbed the media's attention, but, as they say, today's headlines become tomorrow's chip paper. 6 months on, is UKIP proving that wrong? What did people think at this Ramsgate chippy about the impact of the new UKIP county councillors on local politics?
Can't say I've noticed a great deal of difference, to be honest. The thing I think is going to be noticed is the way they're making the other politicians who run the country pay more attention to what they're trying to do on immigration and various other things like that. Yeah.
I ain't got a clue who UKIP are, and I'm always busy working.
UKIP's strongest victory in the South East was here in Thanet. The party took 7 out of the 8 seats in this district, while Labour's Will Scobie won the remaining one.
Because of their stance on immigration, they are alienating people, and people feel like they cannot get in touch with them. There are people who may have come to this country from other countries who may need help, for example, getting into their local primary school, and they don't feel like they can contact their UKIP county councillor, so they're contacting me. So I've had to pick up casework from across the island, which I'm only too happy to do. But this is the problem. There's large communities in Thanet that are not being represented by their county councillors.
There's greater UKIP representation in Kent than anywhere else in the country. They have 17 county councillors here. So how have they performed so far? The group has a good attendance record since May. They were present at 85% of meetings they were expected to be at. But so far they've failed to table any motions to discuss at full council, although they have cooperated with opposition colleagues.
You can see how well they've done here, you know.
a keen observer of the county's political manoeuvrings, believes the UKIP group has a piecemeal approach to local government issues.
They are not a whipped group, so within the group, individual councillors may look at different policies differently to their colleagues, which is quite unusual. And I think that's one of the reasons why, at this stage, I don't regard them as a particularly cohesive opposition force. One of the main reasons is that they fought on a manifesto which was very nationally focused, if you like. They've come onto the council without having any real engagement or experience of being a councillor involved in deciding and determining and voting on policies affecting schooling, social care, all the very key services for a lot of residents in the county.
One reason for UKIP's apparent low profile so far could be a lack of experience. Most of its Kent County councillors are relatively new to politics. Only 3 have prior experience of being on local councils. So, will the party have enough high-calibre candidates to draw from at the next general election when they plan to contest every constituency in the country?
Disgrace! You're disgraced!
The spotlight on the party has already thrown up a number of embarrassing controversies. MEP Godfrey Bloom was sacked from UKIP after joking that a group of female activists were sluts. Before his election, Ramsgate County Councillor Martin Heal said he regretted being an active member of the National Front in the 1970s. And Geoffrey Clark, who ran in a Kent by-election, was suspended by UKIP after claiming that unborn babies with Down syndrome should be compulsorily aborted.
I don't think their performance in local government is going to be a big factor in UKIP's performance at the general election. What will matter for them is the performance of their leadership team, and particularly of their leader Nigel Farage, and whether or not they select as candidates people who the electorate can take seriously, or whether they make their traditional mistake and select nutters who can embarrass them at a general election campaign. That's their big Achilles heel.
6 months ago, the impact of UKIP was felt across the region, but it seems they've yet to capitalise on that. So will the party prove to be a serious force in British politics, or will its power at the next general election be limited to splitting the vote on the right and undermining the dominance of the Tories in the South East?
Well, we'll talk about that threat to the Tories with Paul in a moment. But first, Janice, let's deal with perhaps the most serious accusation in Bhavani's report, that your party isn't actually representing the people of Kent because you've alienated so many of them. They don't feel they can approach their councillors because of the language that's been used.
Well, I absolutely do not understand that.
Well, Will Scobie made that point in the report.
But he did not. He didn't find anybody, did he? He didn't actually. That this was just the Labour
opposition saying this. He's the only person who doesn't represent UKIP who's elected in that part. I mean, it's an accusation that you must have heard before. That
we represent everybody. Everybody should feel comfortable about coming to us. We are there to represent everybody, whether they are from they've got a Lib Dem persuasion, Labour, whether they. I think he's alluding to immigrants. They have a right to be represented.
Yeah, he was alluding to immigrants, and I suppose when people hear Nigel Farage talk of Romanian criminal gangs coming to this country, you could understand why other immigrants in this country feel they can't approach an elected member of the council who represents UKIP.
Let's talk about Romanian criminal gangs. 92% of ATM crime in this country is committed by Romanian criminal gangs.
We're talking about that kind of language and what that does on a local level to the people you represent. It alienates a lot of people.
No, sorry, don't accept it.
What about that other accusation that you haven't put any motions to full council? I know you're not on Kent County Council.
I'm not here I came on here to actually talk about Europe and Richard Ashworth.
Your performance, you've been elected now for 6 months in Kent, what that does to you, to the party nationally. There's an accusation that you don't have a cohesive party strategy. That applies not just at local level, but nationally as well.
What do you mean, the whipping system?
Yes.
Well, again, we take the view that one size doesn't fit all. So if in one ward it's right that there's a road built or they've got pavement issues or issues with schools, it doesn't necessarily translate into the next ward, especially in East Kent. It's very different what happens in East Kent to West Kent. It's an enormous county and it's very, very different.
But the danger is when it comes to national and European elections, which you're standing in next May, people aren't sure what your party stands for.
We do have a full manifesto.
One size doesn't fit all. People more...
Well, we will have a full manifesto.
But that's not coming through at local level? If it's not coming through at local level now, the danger is that could damage your electoral prospects nationally.
Our councillors stood on a manifesto across the country in the May local elections. We will have a full manifesto for the European elections, and we will have a full manifesto for the 2015 elections.
But the danger is people aren't quite sure what you stand for on specific issues.
Well,
like
they will do.
schooling.
We will have a full manifesto.
But so far they don't. Okay.
Well, we do. We do have a manifesto.
It's not just county council in Europe. You were accused of being the laziest party in June.
But people don't understand what we stand for in UKIP. We don't go there to tweak at legislation. We actually say no. We don't believe any legislation should be coming down from Europe. So we go there and we vote no. We don't sit there tweaking so that our financial services industry can go offshore, as which it has done. 84% of our laws now come from Europe. We're saying no. It's the sovereignty of our own country that we're fighting for. So we say no. We don't sit there and tweak.
One more question before I bring Paul in. I'm sure he's desperate to give us his considered opinion about this. But that quote from Tim Luckhurst, that the problem you've got is that you haven't got enough high-calibre candidates to field in every constituency at a general election, and therefore you're going to end up, I think his line was, selecting nutters who can embarrass the party.
Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? But take the European elections. There's 73 seats in the UK representing the MEPs representing the UK. We had 330 applicants, and then that was narrowed down. I went through that process. I've also been through the Conservative Party process at parliamentary level as well, and it was very, very vigorous. We've got the problem, we've got growing pains as a growing party, and we're going to stand a full slate of candidates. Of course, we've still got people there from an old party, but do you know what? They were the only people that do not allow people in from the BNP and the National Front. Now, Labour do. Labour have actually got people sitting in councils now that were BNP members.
Let's bring in Paul Carter. We saw how worried you were when you lost all those seats to Janice's party in May. How concerned are you about the further damage this party could inflict on you at the next elections?
Yeah, one of the most difficult days, certainly in the last few years, that I've experienced in politics, where UKIP did do better than was anticipated in the southeast of England, particularly in Kent and Essex. Now, we're working alongside UKIP as the major opposition party. I think they were enormously winded and quite shocked when some of the candidates woke up to being county councillors. I think they've been enormously impressed by what we do and carry out at County Hall in both the administration and the complexity of the services that we run.
But when it comes to national and European politics, which obviously Janice is concerned about, how much does it concern you when you hear the language in your party changing, when David Cameron talks about there being wafer-thin public support for staying in the EU? I mean, Ed Miliband has accused your party of navel-gazing on Europe, and as we know, the danger is that becomes a distraction to your party and it splits the vote, because people will go to UKIP.
Yes, I mean, it is a big threat. We've got the European elections coming up sometime soon in June next year, and that's going to be a massive test. I think the issues at the moment are immigration and our future in Europe, and I think that David Cameron and the Conservative National Party has got to start articulating what a renegotiated arrangement looks like within the European community, with our friends in the European community, because we need to know. And personally, I'm on the fence. I'm neither a Eurosceptic nor a Europhile. I can see pros and cons. I can see problems in the current relationship, which is becoming even more strained. Let's have a good debate and discussion, and start that debate now.
I know Janice would love to start that debate now, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there and move on. Now, first it was the big six electricity firms, then the water companies. Now Ed Miliband has set his sights on the Wonga economy. That's the payday lenders who add to what he calls the cost of living crisis facing many families. Medway in Kent has the greatest concentration of such companies in the country. So are they a dangerous force which, as the Labour leader says, are running riot through our communities, or companies that offer an important service to people in need of short-term loans? Well, earlier this week, MPs on a House of Commons Select Committee questioned the bosses of some of the biggest payday lenders, including Wonga. Here's a taste of that hearing.
Do you think that your charges are extortionate and that you're a rapacious organisation?
No, of course we don't accept that. The product actually is used moderately by most people, and of course compared to the market that we have opened up are those people traditionally using overdrafts and credit cards.
I ran a small business. What's your interest rate when someone goes over the period of time for the overdraft or the equivalent in your world?
Well, the unauthorised overdraft charges, if you borrow...
How much is that?
If you borrow £100, my understanding from Which, who I think will be here later, the unauthorised overcharge charges for 30 days run up to between £80 and £115. If you borrow the same from Wonga, that's our most expensive loan, 100 for 30 days, it's £37. Wonga's business is aimed to lend people who can pay us back. That's how we make money. And the vast majority of people pay us back on time. But we are lending to vast numbers of people small sum credit. And I think it's fair to say that those figures, frankly, compare favourably with other lenders in the industry, including credit cards and banks.
Well, we're joined in the studio by Councillor Vince Maple, and Vince is a Labour councillor in Medway, and it was your party's initiative that brought about a ban on payday loan companies advertising on council websites. You've obviously taken action, but you'd like to go further.
Well, that's right, Natalie. I mean, we've seen over the last 2 years a fairly cross-party approach to this in Medway. Councillors of all political persuasions are frustrated by issues like the planning law, which means we have no power to say, actually, we've got too many of these shops in our high streets. We've also seen evidence from people like the CAB who have been kind of really shocking with the just levels of debt that people have and the link to payday lenders, particularly those on our high street. So I've been campaigning very hard on this. But it's also not just about saying payday lenders are bad. It's also about saying what's the community alternative, and that's where credit unions are critical to this debate.
So that's one of the things you'd like is to... I know Ed Miliband would like to take money, tax the companies and spend it on publicly funded alternatives like credit unions. And you also want greater powers for local authorities so they can stop the shops opening.
Well, that's right. I think we've heard from the coalition government the word localism bandied around more than ever in the last couple of years. But the reality is, us as local councillors, representatives for our community, are powerless at the moment. So I think we need to see big changes when it comes to the issue of planning laws, to say actually it should be local representatives who are elected by the community to form up what that high street and town centre looks like.
Well, let's bring in one of those local representatives, Paul Carter. Do you support that call for greater powers locally so places like the Medway towns can say actually we've got enough, we don't want any more? Yeah,
I think there's got to be national regulation and encourage credit unions to flourish where possible. These payday loan companies do fulfil a function, but the track record of people getting more and more into the debt mire and getting all sorts of financial problems built on top of each other and escalating needs to have limits. And I think the statistic from the Citizens Advice Bureau is an interesting one, where clearly in these difficult times where most people are feeling poorer with benefit reductions and income reductions, that there needs to be sensible national regulation and the preference for establishing good credit unions that can lend money responsibly at affordable rates.
Ed Miliband said he wants a cap on the cost of credit. I think 4,000% APR can be charged by some of these companies, whereas a credit union, I mean, there's one in Rother, near Hastings, which is offering 26.8%. So a cap sounds sensible, surely. Yeah, and
26.8 makes your eyes water as well at the same time. I mean, this is a difficult area of business. There does need to be the provision for short-term loans to tide people over difficult periods in their family finances.
And this is the point, isn't it, Janice, that people do need short-term help with their finances. These are companies which exist because there's a market for them, and the danger is if we clamp down on them too much, people will go to loan sharks.
If you have a cap on interest rates, and I don't think the committee went far enough on that this week, and you also have a cap on the amount of loans that anybody can take out in a particular year. There's a great credit union that's been set up in Maidstone. It's run in conjunction with the Diocese of Canterbury as well. It's called Kent Savers. Again, we promote that as well. But you have to ask why people have got into this state in the first place. It is the cap on benefits, absolutely, and universal credit is not going to work unless we reform certain other areas. If you look at common agricultural policy, for argument's sake, it costs every family another extra 25% because of unreformed cap.
Let's stick to payday loans. Sounds like we're all agreed that more needs to be done. Let's bring Vince back in again. But the trouble is, say these are companies. You heard their arguments in the Commons this week. They're actually quite sensible. So quite often, more more responsible in their lending than some of the banks and credit card companies?
Well, I think it's about looking, you know, internationally, and actually Janice, I'm sure, would love us to talk about international issues, but actually in lots of countries, these organisations have been banned outright. So I think it's about looking at what's happened elsewhere. Absolutely about promoting our credit unions to be great community cooperatives and actually making sure there is a total cap on the cost of credit. That's really important.
OK, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now it's time for a roundup of the other political events you might have missed this week with our political editor, Louise Stewart.
Kent County Council is consulting on plans to end a 3-year council tax freeze and increase bills by 1.9%. It has to save a further £270 million and looks likely to reject the government's extra funding to prevent the rise. Energy firm Quadrilla signed a 30-year lease in Bolcombe where it carried out exploratory drilling. Its boss, Francis Egan, was asked by a Lords committee if he could guarantee fracking was completely safe.
We wouldn't do it if we didn't think it was safe.
The Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, used typically colourful language at a speech to the CBI when he urged the government to
end the dinner, cut the cackle
and build a hub airport in the Thames estuary. And UKIP leader Nigel Farage, who was previously fined for verbally attacking the EU President Herman Van Rompuy, doesn't seem to have learned his lesson.
Just over 400 years ago, there was an attempt to blow up the Houses of Parliament with dynamite and to destroy our constitution. That was a violent approach. You, of course, have taken the dull, technocratic approach to all of these things.
Paul Carter, you used quite strong language about Eric Pickles' financial incentives to keep the council tax frozen in Kent. You called it a bribe. Are you sticking 2 fingers up to the government with your new budget?
Well, we've utilised a little bit of help from Mr Pickles over the last 3 years,